Well, as we close our conversation this week on the role of women in the church, we get to really kind of end the day really on one of the most perplexing passages, I think, in all of the New Testament, because it doesn't seem to make sense as we read it literally as it's written. But in verse 15, Paul makes a statement. He says, "But women will be preserved through the bearing of children if they continue in faith and love and sanctity with self-restraint." In other words, women will be preserved through childbearing. Is he saying that therefore they won't die in childbirth? I think that was the interpretation, and many people have rendered it that, but it doesn't make any sense because the word that's used here or translated is preserved, and I know why the NIV translators did this, because they wanted to get away from the word saved, because we hear the word saved and we all automatically think about salvation, and there's serious problems with that, because if a woman is saved by childbearing, then she's saved by her works. She's not saved by grace. So that can't possibly be what he's talking about. And secondly, the question comes, does it mean that she won't die in childbirth? Well, I'm sad to say that there are many women of faith who have died in childbirth. And it wasn't because there was some hidden sin that we didn't know about. It was because that happens sometimes. It's just one of those things, and God is ultimately the controller of that, and it's a tragedy, obviously, in every situation. But I don't think that makes any sense either, because Paul was well aware that there were women who died in childbirth within the church in his own context. I don't see any indication, historically or biblically, that there were women who, because they were so faithful, never died in childbirth and always had successful birthing experiences. So I don't think that that's at all what Paul is trying to imply or what he's saying. In fact, it's the fact that it's the plural pronoun here is used in what's called the future tense that indicates what Paul is really referring to is Eve. He's looking back at Eve. It's looking back at how Eve was responsible for leading mankind into sin, and yet God in his plan was going to use women to lead mankind out of sin. In other words, in part we could say, well, that was through the birth of Jesus being born to Mary, but I think even beyond the idea of Jesus being born, as some believe, it could be right, I'm not positive, but as some believe, I think it's really basically saying that women have this special, unique position in the fact that they are able to bear children. Now, we live in an age where it's so ludicrous that it even becomes a point of conversation and is seriously considered. But the idea that men can bear children is something that's absolutely false and not true. We understand that. It's ludicrous. But at the same time, the fact that women are able to bear children is a very unique ability and gifting that they have, that they experience something in that process that no man can ever know, that no man can really appreciate. I mean, when a woman carries a child in her womb for 9 months, there's a relationship that develops between her and that unborn child through the pregnancy, through the birth, through the infancy, and even early childhood. And I say that from personal experience, obviously, that my wife has a kind of connection with all of her children that goes beyond anything I can quite comprehend. And it's not just the idea that this child is birthed from your seed and gestates within you, because in reality, the DNA of that baby in your body is completely different from your DNA. I mean, in other words, it's a separate individual. That's part of the problem with the whole abortion argument, is it's not her body. That baby is not her body. That baby's body is the baby's body. It's a completely separate body, and she has no right to kill it. But the whole point is that doesn't change the fact that this gestation process creates an emotional and physical and mental bonding that is really unique to a woman's experience. And, I remember when my kids were born, watching them come out of the womb, and especially the first one, I'd never seen a baby born. I'd never even held a baby before in my life. And I didn't know what to make of it. I mean, I was just overwhelmed. It was kind of, overwhelming to me to look at this baby. And my wife is just, she's just gone through this horrendous pain of delivering this baby, and she's ecstatic with joy. And I remember how puzzled I was. I looked at that, but something had transpired in her on a level that was so much deeper than anything I could understand or know. That I'm not saying I envy it because I'm afraid of the pain, but at the same time, you do envy the fact that she is experiencing something. And that's, I think, part of what Paul is getting at here is that women have this unique position in their relationship with their children. And when we look at it realistically, it's mothers who nurture children. There's a great book, one of my favorite books, it's out of print now, but it's called Mothers, Leaders, and Success. I don't know if you've seen it, by a guy named Guy Odom. And it's a fascinating historical study on the role of women in creating great leaders through history. What kind of women or mothers make great leaders? And that whole adage of the hand that rocks the cradle rules the world, basically Odom says historically that seems to be absolutely true, that men and women who become great movers and shakers in the world were made that way by the interaction with their mothers far more than their interaction with their fathers. That the mothers were the key component in helping them to develop the personalities and the characters and the disciplines and the attitudes. In fact, my kids are all much smarter than I am, and I realize they get that from their mom. They don't get that from me. The whole point is, though, that there are certain things and abilities they have that are unique to them that I know they learned at the hand of their mother's care and loving. So, men and women have different roles. I mean, men's roles is to provide and protect. We need to get up in the morning and go to work to show our kids how to get up in the morning and go to work. We need to show them how to have a work ethic, to have self-discipline. We need to show them how to make, those kind of sacrifices. And we need to show them what strength looks like, what manliness looks like. Women have a different role. They are the ones who make children feel safe and secure. They're the ones who provide that nurture and warmth emotionally. And so it's that combination. When somebody says, well, we use the term parenting. I read something recently, someone said we should ban that term because kids don't need parents. They need mothers and they need fathers. They don't need just parenting. And you realize that the word parenting has been instituted into our conversation so that we can get away from the idea that mothers and fathers are both essential. Even Barack Obama, when he was president, said the problem in the African American community was the absence of fathers. 70% of black kids grow up without a father figure in the home. Well, and now it's up to 40 or 50% in the white community. And we're wondering why we see young men who don't know how to act out properly and misbehave and are trying to assert their masculinity within the culture and often in very damaging, destructive ways. Well, it comes down to the fact that they haven't had a model. They don't have a man in their life. They just have a mom. Their mom loves them, they nurture them, care for them, and many times they're fiercely devoted to their mothers, but they have no concept of fatherhood. And that is really what's killing our culture. It's really what's bringing chaos and destruction. You can't have a riot if nobody shows up. And the point is, who shows up? A lot of angry young men. That's who shows up. And they're ventilating their anger. And I bet you dollars to donuts, you'd find that 90% or more of them didn't have a father in the home. And if they did, the father was abusive. In fact, we know in our prison population, it's overly dominated with young men who did not have a father in their home. So it's a critically important role and not one to be abdicated, not one to be neglected, not one to be taken for granted. I would say to both fathers and mothers, your kids are watching you. Their eyes are on you. They're focused on you 24/7, that you are their tutor. You're teaching them how to deal with life. And you need to be working hard on how you deal with life. I know many of us come from homes that were dysfunctional, and so we're at a disadvantage and we're trying to figure it out, on the go. And I know that's hard and I know that's difficult, but it's also worthwhile because it can make all the difference in the world. At the end of the day, my parents had all sorts of issues. They weren't believers at the time, but I'll tell you one thing that they did do. They loved me. And they stayed together, even though they didn't want to for quite a few years. They stayed together. They continued to provide a home with a father and mother in it. And I just think about what would have happened to me if I hadn't had that. So I think it's really important for us to hold these things close and understand that these are central issues that go far beyond the idea of who's in control. Because ultimately, if God is in control, then it doesn't matter who's in control, because what's going to follow is chaos. God bless you. Have a great weekend.